I never thought the day would come when my husband's daughter would shove me out of my own house and scream, "He has dementia, get out!" I remember standing on the porch in shock while the man I loved sat inside, confused and barely able to speak. Months later, when I was still trying to accept what happened, my phone rang late at night. A nurse from his care rotation was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Then she said the words that froze my entire body. "Your husband doesn't have dementia. She has been drugging him, and tonight she told me to give him a final dose." My name is Lena Rowan, and this is the story of how I lost my husband to his own daughter's lies and how I fought to bring him back. Jonas, my husband, is a gentle, calm man who spent his life teaching high school history. He always believed the best in people. His daughter Taryn never accepted me, but I never imagined she would go this far. If you are listening to this, stay with me because what happened next changed everything I believed about family, trust, and danger hiding behind a smile. Before everything fell apart, my life with Jonas felt steady and warm. We lived in a quiet neighborhood in Colorado where mornings smelled like pine trees and evenings ended with simple dinners we cooked together. Jonas liked to hum old country songs while chopping vegetables, and I loved how he always held my hand during our weekend walk. We had been married for 7 years, and those years felt peaceful. I thought we were building a strong, blended family, even though Taryn, his daughter, never warmed up to me. She was polite in front of Jonas but cold when he stepped away. I tried to understand her. Losing her mother was hard, and I entered their life only a year later. Still, I always believed time would help her accept me. I was wrong. A few months before the big blow-up, I started noticing changes. Taryn began visiting more often, but not in a friendly way. She walked around the house like she owned it, and made comments that felt sharp, even when she said them with a smile. She claimed I kept Jonas too busy and said he needed more real family time, which was her way of pushing me out of the picture. I leaned on my sister, Nora Briggs, who has always been the level-headed one in our family. Nora told me to keep calm and watch for red flags. She said, "Lena, people show you who they are if you stand still long enough." At the time, I didn't realize I had already been seeing those signs and ignoring them. Then Jonas began acting different. He forgot simple things like where he placed his glasses or what day it was. He slurred his words during breakfast and looked exhausted even after a full night of sleep. I asked him if he was feeling sick, and he said, "I'm just tired. Taryn thinks it's my age catching up to me." His voice was shaky, almost unsure of his own answer. I went with him to see Dr. Henry Lawson, his longtime doctor and someone we trusted. Dr. Lawson looked puzzled and said Jonas showed no signs of dementia during his last exam. That should have calmed me, but something inside me felt heavy and wrong. When we returned home, Taryn took control of Jonas's medication. She said, "I mixed them up," which was not true. She locked them in a cabinet and insisted she would handle everything from now on. Jonas started slipping away after that. His confusion grew, his energy faded, his spark disappeared. And every time I questioned it, Taryn said I was stressing him and that my presence made his condition worse. One afternoon, I found strange bruises on Jonas's arm and asked him where they came from. He looked at me with tired eyes and whispered, "I don't know." That was the moment I felt real fear. Not fear of illness, but fear of something being done to him. But I had no idea how far it would go until the night she threw me out and told me he had dementia. I never imagined that was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. After Taryn forced me out of the house, I could not shake the feeling that something terrible was happening behind closed doors. The way Jonas looked at me that day stayed in my mind. His eyes were cloudy, his face pale, and his movements slow, almost as if his body no longer belonged to him. I replayed his expression over and over. It was not the look of a man with dementia. It was the look of someone trapped in his own body. The days that followed were filled with worry. I stayed with my sister Nora, who did her best to comfort me, but I felt sick every morning thinking about Jonas waking up in that house without me. I tried calling him, but every call went to voicemail. I tried texting him, but the messages remained unread. I even drove past the house once, hoping to catch a glimpse of him through the window, but the curtains were drawn tight. The home that once felt warm and welcoming now looked like a sealed box keeping secrets inside. Nora wanted me to confront Taryn directly, but I had already done that. Every attempt made things worse. I knew pushing any harder might give Taryn an excuse to cut Jonas off from everyone. I did not want to give her more power. Still, I could not shake the sense of dread that kept building in my chest. Something was wrong. Every instinct in my body told me that Jonas was not safe, and the fact that I had no proof made it even harder to breathe. Days turned into weeks. I kept myself busy by helping Nora around her house, but my mind stayed locked on Jonas. I tried reaching out to Dr. Lawson again, hoping he might update me on Jonas's condition, but he said Taryn had canceled Jonas's follow-up appointments. That answer made my stomach twist. Jonas never skipped his checkups, especially with someone as careful as Dr. Lawson. When I told the doctor that Jonas's decline seemed sudden and strange, he hesitated before saying he agreed something felt off. He promised to look into it, but he also said he needed consent from Jonas or a legal family representative to check his records. Since Taryn had taken over everything, she was blocking any involvement. That alone should have been a sign that something was deeply wrong. Meanwhile, little pieces of information kept stirring my worries. A neighbor who lived 2 houses down sent me a message saying she had seen an ambulance outside our home a week earlier, but did not know why. Another neighbor told me Taryn had been shouting at someone inside the house on several nights. I felt helpless, as if I were watching my life break apart through a glass wall. What truly pushed my fear into panic was something small but chilling. I received a picture from a mutual friend who had run into Taryn at a grocery store. In the background of the picture, I saw Jonas sitting in the car. He looked thinner, almost fragile. His head leaned against the window and his eyes were half closed, as if he could barely stay awake. He was not the same man I had married. He looked lost and broken. I tried telling myself that maybe he was adjusting to new medications, but the truth was harder to ignore. His decline was too sharp, too sudden, too unnatural. I needed answers, and the only person who could give me any was Taryn, but she was the one shutting me out. I decided to go back to the house, even if it meant she would scream at me again. When I arrived, I knocked on the door and stepped back as I waited. Taryn opened the door with a cold smile that made my skin crawl. Before I could speak, she crossed her arms and said, "You are not allowed here. He does not want to see you. You stress him." I told her I only wanted to check on my husband. Her expression hardened. She stepped forward, blocking the doorway. With a sharp voice, she said, "Leave before I call the police. He has dementia. You make it worse." Her tone was not caring. It was controlling, almost practiced, like she had said this line many times before. I tried to look past her to see inside, but she slammed the door shut. That was the moment I knew something was deeply wrong, not just emotionally wrong, but dangerously wrong. Jonas's behavior did not match dementia. Taryn's control did not match concern. The secrecy, the locked medication, the bruises, the sudden decline, and the anger Taryn showed every time I questioned anything, all pointed to something dark. I told Nora everything, and she grabbed my hands and said, "Lena, this is no longer just family drama. This is something else. You need to prepare yourself. This could get worse before it gets better." She was right. What I did not know yet was that the worst was very close. A single phone call was about to reveal the truth, and it would shake me far more than being thrown out of my own home. The night everything shifted began like any other since I had been pushed out of my home. I was sitting at Nora's kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold. The house was quiet, but my thoughts were loud. I kept replaying Jonas's tired eyes, his bruises, and the way Taryn had shoved me out as if I were the problem instead of the woman who loved him. I felt trapped between fear and guilt. Guilt that I left. Fear that staying would have changed nothing. I was turning these thoughts over in my mind when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something inside me urged me to pick up. When I answered, the voice on the other end was shaky and small, like it belonged to someone who had been holding in fear for too long. She said, "Is this Lena Rowan?" I answered yes, thinking it was a bill collector or someone from Jonas's old job. Instead, the woman broke into tears. It took several seconds before she could speak clearly. She told me her name was Valerie Grant, a nurse who had recently been assigned to help care for Jonas. Hearing her say his name made my chest tighten. Valerie lowered her voice as if she was afraid someone might overhear even through the phone. She said she did not know me but had heard enough conversations in the house to understand who I was. She said she could not stay silent anymore. Then she delivered the words that changed everything. Your husband does not have dementia. Nothing about his symptoms matched dementia. He is being drugged. I froze. For a moment, my mind refused to understand what she meant. My body felt cold from the inside out. I asked her to repeat herself, and she did, in a whisper that shook with fear. She said Jonas was being given medication that did not belong to him and that the doses were increasing. She also said Taryn kept the bottles in a locked drawer and did not allow anyone else to touch them. I asked Valerie how she found out. She explained that she had checked Jonas's chart and noticed inconsistencies between what Taryn claimed he was prescribed and what was written in his medical records. She said she saw bottles with mixed labels, pills that did not match the doses she was told to give, and logs that looked fake. She told me she had been trying to figure out whether she was mistaken, but tonight, something happened that pushed her past her breaking point. Her voice cracked as she told me that earlier in the evening, Taryn pulled her aside and handed her a different pill bottle. Taryn told her to give Jonas a strong final dose because he had been struggling too much. Valerie said she felt sick the moment she heard that. She said no medical professional would ever use that phrase. It sounded like something meant to end suffering in a way that went far beyond what was lawful or ethical. My heart began pounding so hard, I could hear it in my ears. I asked Valerie where Jonas was at that moment. She said he was in bed, groggy and barely responsive. She said she pretended she would return with a glass of water to give him the medication so Taryn would leave the room. Instead, she hid in the hallway and called me. Valerie kept apologizing, saying she was scared of losing her job and afraid of what Taryn might do if she found out she had called. I told her she was brave and that she was saving my husband's life. I promised her she was not alone. The moment I hung up, I felt something inside me shift from fear to determination. I had spent weeks feeling helpless, but now I had information that demanded action. I called Dr. Lawson first. He answered on the second ring. When I told him what Valerie said, he cursed under his breath and said this confirmed his suspicions. He told me we needed the police involved immediately. Nora heard the panic in my voice and came into the kitchen. I told her what happened, and she did not waste a second. She grabbed her keys and said, "We are going now." Dr. Lawson, Nora, and I drove toward the house while I stayed on the phone with Valerie. She whispered updates to me, saying she was keeping an eye on Jonas from a distance and had hidden the pill bottle in her bag to use as evidence. She sounded terrified, but steady. I told her we were on our way with the police. I told her to stay close to Jonas, but not to confront Taryn alone. She agreed, but her fear grew when she said Taryn had gone into the kitchen and started opening drawers, as if she were looking for something. Valerie said she could hear her muttering to herself. By the time we arrived down the street, patrol cars were already approaching. I pointed to the house and told the officers everything. They moved quickly. Some headed to the front door while 2 others went around back. Standing there on the sidewalk, watching officers rush toward the home I once shared with my husband, I felt my breath grow tight. This was the moment I decided I would not let fear control me anymore. I would fight for Jonas. I would bring him back. I did not know what we would find inside that house, but I knew this was the turning point. Everything was about to come to light, and nothing would ever be the same. The police moved toward the house with a steady confidence that steadied me for a moment. Their flashlights cut across the driveway as they approached the door. I stood between Nora and Dr. Lawson, gripping my hands so tightly my fingers shook. I had imagined this moment so many times in my mind, but nothing prepares you for watching officers march into the home you built with the person you love, ready to uncover something terrible. An officer at the front door knocked firmly and called out, "Police, we need to speak with the occupants." There was a short silence that stretched longer than my heartbeat could handle. Then I heard footsteps from inside. The porch light flashed on, and the door creaked open. Taryn stood in the doorway wearing a thin smile that did not reach her eyes. The officer announced again that they needed to speak with her and check on Jonas. Her smile dropped. For a split second, I saw something sharp in her expression, something cornered and dangerous. She tried to close the door, but the officer placed his hand against it to stop her. He remained calm, but firm, saying they had a welfare concern and needed to enter. At first, she argued, raising her voice and saying, I was making things up because I was jealous and unstable. She pointed at me and said I was obsessed and could not let go of her father. I felt my stomach twist, but the officer ignored her rant. Another officer walked up behind her and asked where Jonas was. That was the moment Taryn's face changed. The anger faded and her eyes darted quickly toward the hallway. It was not just panic, it was guilt. That one glance was all the officers needed. They stepped inside and she stumbled back, shouting that they had no right. They passed her and moved down the hallway toward the bedroom. I followed with Nora by my side, my legs shaking, my breath thin and fast. As soon as we reached the bedroom doorway, I felt my knees weaken. Jonas was lying in bed, half sitting up but drifting in and out of awareness. His head leaned forward and his skin looked pale and damp. He looked smaller than I remembered, as if the weight of the past months had taken pieces of him away. "Jonas," I said, stepping closer. His eyes opened halfway. For a moment he stared at me without recognition, and my heart cracked. Then he blinked again, and a spark of clarity appeared. His lips trembled as he struggled to speak. "Lena," he whispered. "Help me." The sound of my name from his voice hit me with a force I cannot explain. It was the first time in months that he sounded like himself. The officers began examining the room. One found pill bottles on the nightstand. Another spotted the drawer with the lock on it. Valerie stepped into the room from the corner where she had been hiding. She handed the officer the mismatched pill bottle with her hands shaking. "This is what she told me to give him," she said. Taryn burst into the room, yelling at her to be quiet and claiming she was lying. She said the pills were part of a new treatment, and I was twisting everything. But her voice cracked with every word. The officers told her to step back while they searched. She kept trying to push past them to get to Jonas, shouting that she needed to protect him. An officer opened the locked drawer. Inside were more pill bottles with crossed-out labels and scribbled markings. Some labels had been peeled off completely. Hidden under the bottles was a small notebook with columns of dates and doses written in a shaky hand. The officer held it up, and Dr. Lawson stepped forward to look at it. His face darkened. "These doses are dangerous," he said. "Some of these are sedatives that should never be mixed." That was when Taryn's voice broke into something frantic. She screamed that Jonas had been suffering for years, that she had been the only one helping him, and that I never cared about him. The officers moved to restrain her as she fought back, kicking and clawing. She kept, shouting that Jonas belonged to her and that she was the only one who ever understood him. As they handcuffed her, she twisted around and looked right at me. Her stare was wild, not sad or scared. It was the look of someone who believed her own lies. She shouted, "He was mine before he was yours." The officers carried her out of the room while she kept screaming. I stood frozen until she was out of sight. Only then did I feel the strength drain out of my body. I went to Jonas's bedside and touched his hand. It felt cool and weak, but he held on. "Lena," he murmured again, "I knew you would come." Tears filled my eyes, but I did not want him to see me break. I told him I was there and would not leave. Dr. Lawson checked his pulse and nodded at me with a look that mixed relief with worry. Jonas needed to go to the hospital. The paramedics arrived and lifted him gently onto a stretcher. Jonas's hand stayed wrapped around mine until the last second before they guided him into the ambulance. Standing in the doorway of our bedroom, I watched them take him away, knowing that the truth had finally come out. The nightmare was no longer hidden. Jonas was alive, and the person hurting him had been exposed. For the first time in months, I felt the smallest flicker of hope. The battle to save him was not over, but we were no longer fighting in the dark. The truth had finally stepped into the light, and everything was about to change. The hospital room felt strangely peaceful compared to the chaos of the night before. Machines hummed softly, and the faint scent of antiseptic drifted through the air. I sat beside Jonas's bed, holding his hand gently as he slept. His breathing was slow but steady. Under the fluorescent light, the shadows on his face looked softer, almost as if rest itself was washing the fog from his mind. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of calm returning. It was fragile, but real. Dr. Lawson had stayed late into the night, reviewing Jonas's blood work with the medical team. When he came into the room early the next morning, he had a tired but relieved expression. He pulled up a chair and explained everything with a careful, steady voice. The tests confirmed Jonas had been given multiple sedatives and anti-anxiety medications in doses far higher than any doctor would recommend. Some had been mixed together in ways that could have shut down his organs if they continued. Hearing it spoken aloud made my stomach tighten. It was worse than I imagined, and the fact that Jonas survived long enough for the truth to come out felt like a miracle. When Jonas finally woke up later that day, he looked around the room with confusion at first. Then his eyes found mine. Not the clouded, drifting stare I had grown used to seeing, but a clear, focused recognition. His fingers curled weakly around mine, and the first thing he whispered was, "You stayed." Those two words broke me in a way nothing else had. I leaned over him and told him I always would. His eyes filled with tears as if he had been carrying months of fear inside him. He said pieces of his memory were returning, but many moments felt like they had been erased. He remembered being tired all the time. He remembered Taryn insisting he take more pills. He remembered trying to ask questions and being told he was confused. But the clearest memory he had was the feeling of being trapped in his own body, unable to understand why everything felt wrong. Over the next weeks, Jonas slowly regained his strength. Nurses helped him walk short distances, and each step showed more of the man I knew returning. Valerie visited him often, sitting quietly at his bedside. She apologized over and over, saying she wished she had acted sooner. Jonas reached for her hand and told her she saved his life. He told her he knew bravery when he saw it, and Valerie cried as if she had been holding that guilt in a long time. Meanwhile, the police worked quickly. Investigators searched the house, collected the pill bottles, and analyzed the notebook of doses. Everything pointed clearly to what Taryn had been doing. She remained in custody, facing charges that would follow her for years. I learned that she had been struggling with deep resentment and abandonment issues since childhood. Those feelings had twisted into something dark, something dangerous. Knowing this did not excuse what she did, but it helped me understand how a person could step so far off the right path without ever realizing they were drowning. When Jonas was finally discharged from the hospital, I brought him home to Nora's house first. I wanted him in a place filled with warmth and safety while the investigation continued and the house was processed. Having him close again brought a comfort I had forgotten. We spent evenings talking, reconnecting piece by piece. Sometimes he cried when he realized how much he had missed. Sometimes we sat quietly, both grateful for simple moments like watching a sunset together or drinking tea at the kitchen table. Once the house was cleared and returned to us, walking inside felt strange. It did not feel like the home we built. It felt heavier, as if the walls were still carrying pieces of the past. Jonas took my hand and said, "We will bring the light back into this house." His voice was steady, full of the quiet determination that made me fall in love with him years ago. While cleaning the bedroom, Jonas found something that shifted the air in the room. A journal tucked behind the drawer of his nightstand. It belonged to Taryn. Inside were pages filled with emotional ramblings about losing her father, about fearing that I had replaced her, about wanting him to depend only on her. Some entries were angry, others were heartbreaking. Jonas sat with the journal for a long time, reading in silence. When he finished, he closed it slowly and said, "She was hurting, but she lost herself in that pain." We decided to lock the journal away, not to erase the past, but to keep it from poisoning our future. Healing did not happen overnight, but it happened steadily. Jonas and I took slow walks together. We cooked simple meals. We talked about everything we had survived, not to reopen wounds, but to understand them. I learned that love sometimes asks you to fight battles you never expected, and Jonas learned that trust must be protected, not given blindly. The ending of our story was not perfect, but it was real. Jonas stood beside me on our porch one afternoon and said, "We have been to the darkest place a family can go, and we came back together. That is what matters." Looking at him in the warm light of the setting sun, I knew he was right. We lost time, we lost peace, but we gained truth, and the truth saved him. It saved us. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to my channel and comment where you are watching from so I can welcome you.